When I was doing ritual crime in the state of Utah, predominantly Latter-day Saint, I was absolutely convinced that every crime on the planet was being committed by a Latter-day Saint. And I remember talking to one of my counterparts in the Deep South, who was an investigator doing ritual crime at the same time. And he says, holy smokes, every one of them are evangelicals that are doing this. And we spoke to a friend at a conference from Chicago who said the Catholics are involved in all of this. And what it taught me was a really important thing, and that is that predators are going to use what they're familiar with, whatever religion they were raised in, whatever belief system they were raised in. But then they're going to take their own perversions and the own direction that they want to take their little church or group or cult or whatever you want to call it, and they're going to pervert the things that they know in order to use it as a way to control others.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was born and raised in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, and I moved out when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 9 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors, YouTube members, and our patrons over on Patreon. We really do appreciate your support.
Yes, and we also want to quickly mention that we have some really exciting news coming out. We decided for my birthday, which isn't till February, I know it's a long ways away, we are going to be doing a Growing Up in Polygamy cruise, where we are going to be inviting anyone who wants to come and join us to come on a vacation. And we've been working with an awesome travel agent who's put together a fantastic package. We're going to be opening that up to our YouTube members and Patreon members first, the last week of June, and then open enrollment after that, July 1st. So keep an eye out for that, but we're really, really excited.
Yes, a lot more to come on this, but we're just excited to announce that it is officially happening in February for Melissa's birthday. So feel free to come and join us. We look forward to meeting whoever can make it. So thank you.
Yes. Today we have been reviewing The Sins of Our Mother from Netflix, talking about the Doomsday Daybell case. And oh my word, our minds have been blown. And we promised all of you that we would get an expert on the trial and the case of what's happened since 2020 when they got caught to now. And so we would love to present that we have Mike from Profiling Evil with us today. Thank you so much, Mike, for being here.
Oh my gosh, I'm thrilled. Thank you. I love being on with you too. It's fun to collaborate with you.
Yes, we love having you. And we know that you've covered this case so thoroughly and that you know all the nitty-gritty details, especially since the trial has been happening. Tell me how it's just barely kind of ending and wrapping up. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I guess round 2 of a 3-round and hopefully more rounds. I mean, we have the conviction of Lori Daybell in the books now. We have the conviction of Chad Daybell in the books, and the defense has now filed some appeals, which is just to be expected. And for the next 10 or 20 years, we'll probably see one appeal after another in that case. And now the state of Arizona is preparing to seek murder on Lori Daybell down in Arizona. So yeah, this goofy saga is going to go on for a while.
Wow. Now, before we get into like all the different trials, really, can you share a little bit of your background and why you're so knowledgeable in these type of things, your background in law enforcement and your experience in taking down extremist people, awful people that are doing awful things, and kind of share with our viewers that maybe haven't had the chance to see you before?
Well, it's a pretty refined expertise, and it's on the criminal justice side of the fence, not the psychological or the therapy side of the fence. But as a very young investigator, probably about 10 or 11 years into my career in law enforcement, I was compelled by the district attorney to investigate a cult in northern Utah. And as a result of that, and of course, we've talked about that. Folks, go back to earlier videos we've done on Growing Up in Polygamy about the Zion Society cult and watch that. But I developed some expertise in understanding kind of closed societies with religious connotations. Just a short time after we concluded that investigation and the trial process, which led to 12 people being convicted on nearly 800 felony charges against children. I was invited to come down to the Attorney General's office and be part of a ritual crime task force that was formed to look into all kinds of closed societies that were using any kind of power and guise to commit horrendous crimes against children and adults. It was called the Ritual Crime Task Force. I served on that for a number of years with a team. We had about 300 bona fide cult cases that we investigated during that time. And I kind of evolved into someone who had an expertise from a police officer's perspective about cult dynamics and cult behavior. Since that time and over the last 30 years, I've continued to study cults. I've continued to be tutored and trained by some of the world's best, Dr. Yanya Lalick, Rick Ross, and others in cult dynamics. And as a result of that, I guess for some reason, maybe they can't find anybody else, but many media stations call me to talk about this, and I get the opportunity to join friends on YouTube channels.
Yeah.
Well,
man,
it's
we
just
appreciate you.
Yes, it's such a pleasure for us to have you here. I mean, we've done a lot with you in the past, and I've worked with you closely regarding FLDS stuff as well. And it's so impressive to me to see how much experience and knowledge you have in these types of cases. So it's no surprise that you are very much involved in the wrapping up and ongoing case of the Daybells. As we were watching the show, The Sins of Our Mother, I feel like the longer we watched, the more and more questions we had. It seemed like we just didn't know much of what was actually going on. We were making our best guesses on maybe this happened, maybe this is the truth and this is the false side of the story. So just kind of going back to when this all came out in 2019, was it?
Yeah, when it all was beginning to unfold.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Did you hear about it right away, or did you come to know more about it later on?
No, I actually spoke about it on Court TV as soon as the actual concern about the missing children came about. And so in July, things really ramped up when Charles Vallow was murdered. The children later, obviously, we discovered were murdered as well, and then Chad's wife. But the interesting thing is just the dynamics leading all up to this, and the way in which these two wacky people somehow converge in space and time and become an item.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask from a law enforcement perspective, because sometimes it's hard to tell on documentaries. It's easy for us to be like, why didn't law enforcement see when Charles was murdered? We see that Lori's very good at manipulating and acting like everything's fine and very believable, right? Cops are it's easy to believe her. And I can see that happening. But from a law enforcement perspective, do you feel like the Arizona police investigated Charles' death as well as what it should have been? Because I know we were questioning it, but we're like, hindsight's 2020. Documentary can grab these bits and pieces. But what do you think about that?
Well, you can even go back further than that to Joseph Ryan, Lori's previous husband prior to Charles Vallow, and the fact that she contracts emotionally with her brother Alex to injure him with a taser, nearly kills the guy because he's got some heart issues, if I remember. And I spoke to his sister on a number of occasions. But then when he suddenly dies, leaving her with a bucket of money that goes to the kids, but she controls, you would think with hindsight, well, maybe law enforcement should have been looking with a little squinted eye or something at that time. And then when you have Charles Vallow, who dies, and she's making comments that are so bizarre, like telling her son he didn't die by gunshot, but he had a heart attack, or other kinds of things, that, yeah, you could say, hey, maybe they should have picked up on some things earlier. And who's to say they didn't pick up on those? But suspecting something and then proving something are two different challenging camps of thought. And, you know, I even think of oftentimes the police reports on the domestic violence or the custody battles or other things where Charles Vallow's saying, hey, my wife thinks she's, you know, some kind of a celestial being, and she thinks I'm an evil person named Ned, and she said that she could have me taken out. People are saying, well, why didn't police do something then? And it's something I always like to bring up is there's a absolute difference from a police perspective of deviant behavior, those wacky thoughts that most of us with legitimate lives and lifestyles and belief systems would say, I would never say something like that. Deviant behavior is not at the same level as criminal behavior. So it's okay to be goofy. In fact, I was asked this about a child predator once, and I said, you know, as disgusting as it is to you and me, it's not against the law to fantasize about having relationships with a child. But the moment that that's acted out, it becomes a criminal event that law enforcement can do something about. So we have to be a little bit kind in our judgment of law enforcement, that they don't just go out and figure out all the wacky people. And think about the far right that says every time you do anything in law enforcement that you're invading on someone's rights. There are a real interesting pathways that need to be navigated by law enforcement.
Yeah, and there's definitely certain rights, and we say that a lot too, even with, you know, extreme religious groups or the FLDS, and people are like, why don't they just go in and fix it? And it's like, well, part of what makes America America is the fact that you can raise your children with your belief system, and it doesn't have to be accepted by everybody else. You have the right and the freedom to do that. And so you can't start, that's why it's always such a tricky line with anything like that, because you need to make sure people still have their freedom to be, like you said, kind of as wacky as they want to be, as long as they're not hurting other people or, you know, engaging in criminal activity. So that's a good point.
And you make a good point here too, that maybe the law enforcement did have some suspicions, but the problem we had is the show made it seem like that Lori convinced them that everything was fine and they just dropped the case. That's what the show kind of portrayed, and we thought, my gosh, they should have done something, you know, but who knows? Once again, it's coming from a show, not the stories and experiences from these officers.
I'm sure if the officers could have watched the documentary and just seen this clip next to this clip next to this clip next to this clip, they would have thought the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, and the reality is, she may have influenced someone to think, oh, this pretty girl that's schmoozing up to me is probably a victim in all of this, or whatever the case may be. And yet, I personally, I'm having a hard time buying it, because there were more than one officer in many of those interviews. And I suspect that there were probably, if someone was leaning a little toward Lori being truthful, the other one might have been leaning toward, oh, holy cow, what's this person saying?
Right. Yeah.
And something that was tricky, though, I noticed, is that she would act almost normal when around officers, but then in her texts and other talking to other people, she was claiming to have visited multiple worlds and that she was this celestial type person. And so it seemed like she would just flip a switch where she went for her psych eval, and when she was talking to the officers, that she just tried to come across as this normal, I'm just, you know, living my religion, you know. And so it was tricky even for us in the show to try to understand her. She just was very, very good at flipping that switch, if you will.
Well, and you know, I mean, take your background out in the FLDS community, even Sam. There are people who are really good publicly and much different privately or secretly. And I oftentimes talk about these kind of three personas that are in people's lives. There's this public thing like the three of us are doing right now, hoping that the people that are listening to us think, oh, that's a pretty nice group of people, and I think I'd like to go and have dinner with them or go on this really fancy cruise they're putting together. And then there's this more private side of us, and that's a side where, Melissa, you kind of come to understand where Sam's warts are and where the buttons are that can be pushed, and we don't share those publicly, but only those that are really close to us get to see that these are places where people could improve over the course of their life, or maybe they never share. That's really cool, but that's the public side. But then when you're dealing with predators like Lori Vallow and others, then you have the secret side, which is that little Tasmanian devil that's hidden below the surface. And rarely, other than if you are a victim or a participant, do you get the chance to see that side of them. And in the trial, we got to see the secret side of Lori and of Chad. And so we have to kind of keep these things in buckets and not be upset when somebody said, I was the next door neighbor and they always brought me chicken soup when I had a cold and they were the nicest people on the planet. That's great. That's the public persona. But what's that secret side? And we all have that secret side. All of the psychology experts would talk about that and the fact that those of us who are somehow holding it together, we might have a thought that is absolutely bizarre or mean-spirited. And right as we're ready to lash out and say that, we have this part of our conscience and this thing that says, wait a minute, that's not right. You're not going to say that. And you push it back down in. But these psychopaths never push it back.
Yeah. Well, talking about psychopaths might be the perfect segue into me asking you some questions about Chad Daybell, because obviously Lori meets him at, I believe it was like a conference or something, right, that he had put on. So he had a little bit of a following and as an author. And I was curious as to what you knew about, I was trying to look up like how many people were really following Chad, how many people were looking at him as an author, but how many people were looking at him as more than an author? Because I know that this whole thing focuses on Lori and him connecting and their journey together, but there were obviously more people than that involved. Could you shed some light on Chad's following and kind of how he got there?
Yeah, most cults would fit this dynamic of a small group of people who are like-minded in their thought processes and their belief systems and in their view of the rest of the world. I think that Chad, by this time, had an established that he was somewhat of a visionary with all his books about seeing dead bodies, even from the time that he was working as a sexton in the cemetery. If you remember One Foot in the Grave, one of his early books, he talked about dead people appearing to him while he's burying them and having these conversations. Well, there's a batch or a segment of society that really digs that kind of stuff, and they really listen to that. And but then along the way, Chad met another author, a woman named Julie Rowe, who had a huge following on the end of world preparation, and she would gather, huge rooms full of people. And so we see images and pictures of Chad Daybell in small groups. We see him there in St. George, Utah, where he meets Lori Vallow with a little larger group, but it's a group of doomsday preppers or people who are working on food storage or other things, some of which might be very legitimate, because there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I do believe I should have a little extra fuel on hand, or I ought to keep my car above a half a tank of gas all the time in case something happens. But it's these types of mentalities that become extreme in their thinking, and that's the kind of group that gravitates. The internet's made it really possible for people with like-minded beliefs. Your channel and my channel are subscribers. They have like-minded interests. Hopefully, we all remain healthy as we go through this process together. But we have to consider it's no different for people that are a little further across the fringe than those of us who are doing things that are more commonly accepted in society.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, we had talked before in one of the episodes about the fact that the people who end up into the best cult leaders or Chad Daybells are the people who take good things and start slowly twisting it because they're taking people, like you said, those like-minded people. It's not preparedness or, preparing for emergency situations. That there's nothing wrong with that. It's this twisting of good things. And I feel like that's the easiest way to get people to like slowly take the pill, right? Is taking something good and twisting it for your own agenda until it turns into something
right.
awful.
And I think that's something that was very tricky that both Chad used and Lori, as well as someone like Warren Jeffs used, where they believe in a certain religion that is, in some cases, a very large religion. And then, so they already have some people that think like-minded in some ways. And then they become more extreme and they start thinking of other ways and twisting the belief system just a little bit so that it's still kind of the same. But over time and gradually, like boiling the frog, they eventually turn up the heat and it just becomes this crazy, crazy group of ideas, I guess.
That are just
but along those lines, Mike, how much do you think his religious beliefs played into this? A lot of people have wondered. Or was it just him for a long time trying to find a way to control people?
Well, I like the way you put that question, Sam, because I'm going to capitalize on one word, or maybe a group of words. His religious beliefs. I think they played a huge role in it. And I think this is something where people often get a little bit off base in their judgment as they look at these kinds of cases. In this particular case, they were former excommunicated Latter-day Saints, and they were using doctrine that was familiar to the Latter-day Saint people as part of that justification of introducing familiar scripture and other kinds of things that felt normal and good to people and something that resonated because they'd heard it throughout much of their life. But what these predators do is they take that familiar scripture and then they start to introduce their own philosophies into it, twisted with their own demented beliefs. And so I guess I want to answer that now with two little add-ons, and that is first that for all of us, when I was doing ritual crime in the state of Utah, predominantly Latter-day Saint, I was absolutely convinced that every crime on the planet was being committed by a Latter-day Saint. And I remember talking to one of my counterparts in the Deep South, who was an investigator doing ritual crime at the same time, and he says, holy smokes, every one of them are evangelicals that are doing this. And we spoke to a friend at a conference from Chicago who said the Catholics are involved in all of this. And what it taught me was a really important thing, and that is that predators are going to use what they're familiar with, whatever religion they were raised in, whatever belief system they were raised in. But then they're going to take their own perversions and the own direction that they want to take their little church or group or cult or whatever you want to call it. And they're going to pervert the things that they know in order to use it as a way to control others and get them to believe that they really are in tune because they seem to pray to some God. And, I don't ever say like with Chad Daybell or Lori Daybell or Jim Jones, or I don't say to God, I say to their God, because it's just not the same God that I believe in that drives that kind of coercive control and abuse and injury. But we as a public are so overwhelmed when something like this happens that we want someone to blame. And folks, going after a religion as someone to blame because a member within that religion did something goofy is as crazy as saying the medical profession's bad because a doctor prescribed pills that I shouldn't have gotten.
Yeah, 100%. We actually had a comment on one of our videos and someone was mentioning the same thing. They're like, I don't know if it's the same religion or if it's the fact that when things happen, that's when it becomes known. And like you said, if it's in Utah, it's most likely that they might have some similar roots. And obviously we've seen how many different split offs and groups and things, and then the more extreme things get. So I love the way you worded that. And it's 100% true. I think also, it's a good reminder too that there is, well, one, that most people in every single group and religion are good.
Yeah.
And to also remember to never expect just at face value that anybody is to be specifically trusted or inherently good just because of their religion either.
Right.
And,
Goes both ways.
and it goes both ways. Well, whether it's a religion or whether they're non-religious. And I just think of this because Sam and I were recently talking about this in regards to children, that sometimes it's easy for us to cling to, well, if you say you're like-minded to me, therefore I should just inherently be able to trust you with my children. And we were saying it doesn't matter what group or what belief somebody has at all. You need to go through proper safety measures to protect yourself, to protect your children, and also not get caught up in the idea that people are inherently trustworthy or not trustworthy based on what their outside person's saying, right? Like what their public persona is saying. And, so it's a good thing to remember that way as well for safety.
Yeah. There's been a lot of stories out there of people that trusted their neighbor or trusted someone in their similar church group or similar like-minded setting. And because it's easier to trust someone that thinks similar to the way you do for some reason, that just, I think, is just human nature. And then unfortunately, like you mentioned, Mike, in every group, in every place, in every religious belief, there is the potential of these predators or these bad people that belong to those groups. So I think it was very well said.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to remind ourselves that cults can be things that we're very used to. I mean, if you are in a group of people like I am that think the only soda pop on the planet is Diet Dr. Pepper, that is a cult.
I'm in that one with you.
There we go. See, and it's like-minded people. But the thing that is so important is there transparency. And you think about the FLDS. In fact, Sam, by way of example, Mayor Barlow's son, I was speaking to a few weeks ago when I was out in the community. He's obviously dead now, but his son works in the area. And I said, if the FLDS people, even knowing that polygamy was being pursued by law enforcement and everything else, if they had been transparent, would you be in a different place today than you are? And you think about any cult that's out there, the one thing that they don't want is transparency if they're a destructive cult. It's we have something special that nobody else has. We have more light and knowledge, and we're the ones preparing for the end of the world. We're the ones responsible. We're bonding together because of our uniqueness, and everyone else is an enemy. Transparency is probably the most important thing that any group could do if they wanted to prove they were legitimate, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%. Because if you're 100% transparent, you have nothing to hide. And therefore, you don't personally believe you're doing anything wrong. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there are some groups out there that become transparent, and then there are all of these things that come to light that they just assume are okay. But yes, in most cases, I agree 100%. It would be, if you're transparent, you have nothing to hide. Therefore, you shouldn't be doing anything wrong.
Yeah. Well, kind of bringing this back to the Daybells in particular, thank you for answering those questions. I think you answered those perfectly, and our viewers are going to be very happy because I know there's been a lot of talk in our comment section about everything that we've been talking about so far. But going from their being arrested, and, we watched, I think the end of Sins of Our Mother was talking about their initial indictments, maybe. I might not have the lingo right. But basically, now they're back in the mainland and they are in jail and they're going to be awaiting trial. They talk about, for a minute there, they weren't sure if Lori was going to be able to be competent for a trial. Can you shed some light on what that looked like and why they ultimately decided that she was?
Yeah, so I don't know a lot about that other than if it was a defense team strategy, it certainly bought them more time. But at the same moment, that was happening and she was ruled incompetent to stand trial, the court was facing the fact that Lori wanted a speedy trial. She wanted this thing over with. And that may have lent more toward the fact that she thought that getting in early might avoid the death penalty. It absolutely ended up by challenging and saying, I want to move quickly. The state wasn't prepared to file a death penalty case against her. And so it may have worked in her favor. But clearly, when you listen to her and when you listen to her on the day she was convicted and made her statement right before being convicted, I had a hard time not looking at her and saying, this person is goofy and maybe mentally ill. But here's the thing that's so important, at least that I think is important to bring out, is that if, for instance, Lori Daybell truly believed that she was ridding the world of zombies, she wouldn't have been hiding from saying, I killed these zombies, also known as my kids or others. She would have been on top of a roof shouting out, I have done God's will and I have killed another zombie. And you can thank me, folks, because our world's a whole lot safer because I'm ridding the world of zombies. But she didn't. She kept quiet. She wouldn't tell. She was deceptive. She was telling people they were fine. So what I often think about is they might be crazy, but they still know what society standards are, that it's against the law to murder your children. But she went about doing it anyway.
That's a great perspective. I was wondering, I was actually going to ask the question, do you think she actually believed that her children were in a better place because she thought that they were zombies and killed them? But that answered my question perfectly. It's a great perspective.
That's a great perspective too for Warren Jeffs, because people ask us that all the time. Well, is he just crazy? Is he just mentally ill? Does he know what he's doing? Is he manipulative? Is it a combination of both? And I think that also applies for him, that he might think that he's doing it, but he also knows that society knows that it's wrong. And so therefore there's still that glimpse of them knowing that what they did was wrong, whether or not they can justify it through whatever they believe is different than knowing what's right and wrong.
So obviously I would say they still have something is wrong in their brain, because there's no way that, in my mind, a normal human being could possibly hurt someone like these people have done. So there's got to be a disconnect somewhere in their brain, in my mind. But at the same time, like you mentioned, Mike, if they are still coherent enough to know that it's bad, then they should receive punishment for it. Yeah. The rightful punishment based on them knowing exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, crazy.
What if the trials, I know that it's just been recent, right? Like in the last, how long have the most recent trials been going on? And can you shed a little bit of light of what that looked like and what was included in those trials? And ultimately, for people who don't know what the conviction was, can you share a little of that?
Well, Chad Daybell's murder trial just ended. Of course, Lori Daybell, going back in time, she was convicted of murdering or conspiring to murder Tylee Ryan, her daughter, and Joshua J.J. Vallow, her adopted son, and Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy Daybell. So that is in the books. She's convicted. She's serving time, but she's now facing murder charges in Arizona for the murder of Charles Vallow, her previous husband before Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell went through a lengthy trial, and his defense attorney frustrated a lot of people, but he did his best at trying to create doubt that somebody else, namely in that trial, they tried to put the blame on Lori and Alex as the perpetrators, and that he was just the dumb guy who wanted the blonde-headed girl, and that he just got sucked into all of this. And he was convicted of murdering JJ and Tylee and Tammy. And of course, there were financial fraud cases attached to that and conspiracy charges. But in Chad's case, he was convicted under a death penalty. So he will suffer death ultimately for his play in the murders. And that was always the question that everyone had was, is Lori in charge or is Chad in charge? And in Chad's trial, it came out very clearly that Chad was the one who was receiving timely revelation. And I found this true in the FLDS, Sam, and this might be cutting too close to home, but the same thing happened when these self-proclaimed prophets start receiving revelation that the younger, good-looking girls happen to be the one God wants to come to their family. Revelation works in marvelous ways when you're a predatory, self-proclaimed prophet. Chad was no different. When this beautiful young blonde, and that's beautiful by his standard, and comes into his life, and all of a sudden this guy who's kind of frumpy and not really out there in the world as some kind of big player has this pretty blonde girl paying attention to him. Melissa, not an attack on blondes, by the way. He's overwhelmed by the attention that he's getting from this girl. She's overwhelmed because she thinks he's a prophet of sorts. And so now you have gasoline and an open flame coming together. And this thing ignites into a horrendous problem. But Chad starts receiving revelation that solves problems. Lori wants Charles Vallow gone because he's a money stream. And she believes that she's going to get the money from his life insurance. She doesn't realize that days before, he gets kind of a bad feeling and changes the beneficiary to his sister. But the children are still downstream beneficiaries. So Lori would still get money as a result of the children receiving money. Joe Ryan, there was money coming to Ty Lee from Joe Ryan's insurance, and both children represented Social Security money coming in. So there was a financial stream. But with that financial stream coming in, there was also a financial outlay because kids are expensive and you got to buy clothes and you got to house them and feed them. And so suddenly Chad comes up with revelation that says, hey, the kids are zombies, got to get rid of them. But if we keep it secret, the money from Social Security keeps coming in. So we end up netting another $4,000 a month without the expenditure attached to it. I'm just putting this into very simple business terms and criminal enterprise terms. So you start seeing revelation fold out to solve problems. And then Lori starts saying, look, you either want me or you don't want me, but you're not going to have your family. And I'm going to just sit out here in the middle of nowhere waiting for you to come along. And suddenly he gets revelation that Tammy's going to die. And then Tammy dies. So revelation is a peculiar thing when you're a predatory, coercive cult leader.
Yeah. Oh, man. Were they able to prove in these trials who actually did the deed of killing and murdering these people?
No, the belief is that probably Alex was the one who killed, although it's questionable of whether Chad physically participated in Tammy's, because there was physical evidence that would support that maybe two people participated in killing her. But most theories are that probably Alex did it. But that's the beauty of conspiracy to commit murder is the same, and so that's kind of where that fell.
And did he also get convicted of? Did anyone get convicted of Alex's murder?
No, it'll be interesting to see if Alex ever is reopened. The timing, 2 days after Tammy's exhumed, is awfully peculiar. And more importantly, his wife Zalema testified in Chad's trial that just before he died, he asked her, do you think I'm going to be the scapegoat here?
Right.
And so he's starting to say, hey, I'm kind of sensing maybe they aren't gods and goddesses, and maybe I'm not a angel executioner. And then, of course, he dies.
Wow, it's just so crazy that they went along with it. I look at Lori, for example, and even if Chad was the one marking people as dark and marking them as these zombies that need to be killed, and whether it was for money or for this crazy belief that they had. Either way, the fact that Lori could say, okay, and go along with it when her own children were the ones that were marked to be killed. I can't even begin to fathom that someone could do that.
Well, and they had plenty of people in their lives that wanted these children too. You know, like you said, like JJ is her adopted. Like,
Right.
so they could have given them to the grandparents. Like, there were plenty of people.
But they couldn't have kept the money, Melissa.
Oh, that's a very good point. So maybe a lot of it was
I
all
hate
about
that.
the money.
Yikes.
Sheesh.
Oh man.
Yeah, you gotta keep in mind not only why people might have done what they did along the way, but what was the true motivation behind all of that, and how did they win as a result of the children losing? Wasn't it interesting that Chad's children weren't identified as dark? And wasn't it interesting? I often thought during this last couple of years, how stupid was Chad? Because if in fact Lori had something to do with Joe Ryan's death, if she is proven to have something to do with Charles Vallow's death, if she had something to do with Tammy Daybell's death, at what point does the Black Widow say, I don't need Chad anymore?
Yeah. Is it true that Chad Daybell's children were like in support of him during this trial?
Yeah, and a lot of people are upset about that. I did a little video on that. You got to keep in mind those kids have lost their mother, and now they were fixing to lose their father. I think it was not really inappropriate of both the defense or the prosecution to call them as witnesses, because I think they are worthless as a witness with that much emotional trauma associated with Chad, and people are really angry that they sided with their dad. But again, keep in mind this idea, we've talked about it before, about cults and the FLDS. You have in Utah polygamous groups that are convert groups where people get pulled in because they meet someone that they're attracted to and they say, oh, I think this is pretty cool, I believe in it. But they still have this support system and lifetime of legitimate kinds of beliefs and understandings. And in those convert groups, they usually don't stay very long. And then you have someone like Sam, who's raised in an ideology from infancy, and I call this a generational cult. And to expect someone like the kids who are raised with this same wacky dad and his thinking to be able to think independently and clearly might be more optimistic than it should be.
Well, do you think there's also the aspect where I feel like when things happen and you feel like there's an outside influence, like you're going to want to blame someone other than the family member that you love. So they might see it as this Lori, it's all of her fault. And our dad, we had a good life. We had a great family all before this Lori person came into it. I feel like, and I don't know if that's a piece of it or not, but it seems like that'd be a very simple thing as a kid to not want to blame the father that you love that raised you in this happy family up to this point, and to want to just blame her and say it's all her fault. It's not our dad, it's her.
If it was a happy family, if indeed, in fact, it was a happy family, I don't know. I didn't watch the trial with his children, with Chad's kids trying to defend him. I don't know if they knew of what he was actually doing, or if he was just gone a lot, or what that looked like. Do you happen to know, Mike?
You know, there's a lot of supposing going on, and all we have are these little tiny pinpricks of view into their life versus people that are on the inside. They're much better positioned to judge that. But I will say it's interesting to me that there were certain things that are true. Number one, it is true that the daughter is weekly putting $30 on Lori Vallow's Daybell's prison commissary account every week. Even now, she's supportive of Lori Vallow. Now, is that because she's doing what her dad wants, or because she really aligns with Lori? It's absolutely true, whether there's any truth to it or not, but it's absolutely true that there are images online that show Chad's daughter with haircut that was very similar to her mother. And then just a short time after, Tammy Daybell comes in, or is dead, and Lori Vallow becomes Lori Daybell, that she changes the color of her hair and starts to mimic Lori Vallow. Now, is it true? I have no idea, but there are images that support those theories. And so you see these kinds of things, and you think, number one, those kids by this point have their own lives. Their dad's life is their dad's life. They've gone through emotional trauma. In no way do I believe they are culpable for anything other than being kids raised in a coercive relationship.
I see.
Yeah.
Man, that's sad.
And coercive doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think Chad was ever mean, but coercive is much broader than that. Influencing.
The people that are best at influencing tend to do it without seeming mean, right? The most deceptive people are the people who do seem kind and loving on the outside and have their own manipulation twisted behind it. But I feel like a lot of times the masters of that are the people who seem the kindest.
It's a long game. They come across as these kind, loving people that would do no wrong, and they just slowly but surely change things bit by bit. And at the point where there's no return because you have followed them and believed them for so long is when they'll do something that's just kind of like a slap in the face. Like, whoa, I didn't know that this would ever happen. But at this point, I believe this person. I'm speaking from my personal experience with Warren Jeffs, if you can't tell.
No, you're right, Sam. And you think about, you don't want to offend God. And what if I'm wrong and I'm just being selfish and not doing what God wants? And so you start adding all of those things on, and that's a terribly tough position for someone to be in. I mean, that's why I hold you with such respect in being able to step away. But I suspect it wasn't a cut the cord and walk away, that there were many nights where you thought, am I doing the right thing?
Oh, yes. Many nights that I almost, in fact, a few nights that I actually drove my car back to Short Creek and just slept in my car in Short Creek, because that is how hard it was for me to leave that behind. And many times I was so tempted to just run back. And yeah, it was a tough time.
Yeah. Oh man. So what is next for the Daybells and their cases? You said appeals are going to be coming up, and what are they trying to appeal, and what would that look like time frame? And also, if you got the death penalty, do they have a time frame for that as well?
Yeah, that's the worst part about our death penalty process in the United States, is it takes decades to complete that process. And I don't know about the two of you, but I would hate to be judged today on the person I was 2 or 3 decades ago. And, even though there is justice and accountability to be executed 30 years later, I find myself waffling, especially as I get older, about the value of death penalty. I also have had families who say, I would rather it was a guaranteed life without parole, because every time they come up for another appeal or another parole hearing, that family relives those experiences and emotions. And so that's what the next 20 or 30 years, in my opinion, look like for Chad Daybell. For Lori Daybell, probably the same thing, whether she's goofy or not. The thing that I worry about is now these people are in a place where they're going to meet other people who are attracted to them. And I know with the Shreves in the Zion Society case, they continued to proselytize while they were in prison. So they'll undoubtedly, because they love to have people think they are great and powerful and in touch with their God, they will continue to be who they are. And we just have to hope someone we love doesn't go to jail and have to sit with them.
Oh my gosh. No, new reality TV show. They have a special jail for all the cult leaders, and they get to battle it out to decide who's the number one leader.
What a great idea.
If anybody is the leader of a cult, then they get stuck in a separate section, and they can all figure out who's of their god is the correct one, and they can figure out who's going to be in charge
Can I
and
add?
try to convert each other.
Can I add that to that prison, they get no communication to the outside world?
Yes,
Because
yes.
that's something that we still see today, that these people get put in prison, but they are still able to communicate to people on the outside. And some of the people on the outside still believe in them. And so their work, in some cases, the things they were doing continues on. And that is just a very, very scary thought for something as crazy as this.
Yeah, how does Warren Jeffs convince a community to move away to other states and other locales and to break up marriages and everything else when a convicted child abuser is sitting in prison?
You know, I actually spoke with someone still in the FLDS not too long ago. I just happened to have that opportunity. And they, to this day, do not believe, not for a second, that any of the things he is being accused for are true.
Or that he was convicted of.
That
Not
he was-
accused of, but
convicted of. That everything he was, yes, thank you, convicted of is not true. They believe that he is wrongly imprisoned, that the world is against him, the apostates that left the church are fighting against him, and that's why he's in prison, not that he ever did anything wrong. So that's why they continue to believe him.
Crazy. Well, and he has now what he may not have had if he'd have remained outside. He's a martyr and continues to be a force that's thought about. And I think that's something that all these predators relish, is the fact that they still remain relevant when they are nobodies after the conviction.
Yes,
Yes.
and actually, this, oh my God, I thought of something else that I was talking to this person still in the FLDS about, and they said something along the lines of, "I'm actually grateful that he's in prison now. I do think that he will get out someday. That God will release him and break down the prison walls. But I'm grateful he's there right now because I feel that he is safer in prison than he would be on the streets because of all of the wicked apostates and people in the world might try to attack him or take him out if he was roaming freely." So another thought that they have.
Wow, man. Well, on that note,
Yeah.
I'm glad that Chad and Lori will not be leaving. Like you said, I agree with you on that. Waiting 30 years worth of appeals and everything like that doesn't sound like a solution to me either, but staying behind bars definitely does. I'm glad that they won't be able to hurt any more people, and hopefully their infamy will not hurt anyone either, and that there won't be those type of repercussions. But thank you so much, Mike, for
Yes.
all of your insight and for being here. We love when we have a chance to be like, hey, can we do a video together? So
It's really fun to collaborate with you. And I would just ask everyone that's listening to just kind of level set when you start to judge people. And as you think about Chad Daybell's kids, for instance, level set where they must be emotionally and the trauma that they've experienced as this whole thing has unfolded. When you think about Lori Vallow and Colby Ryan and others who have lost, not Lori Vallow, I don't care about, but Colby, who has lost everything, his siblings, his wife, everything as a result of this cult and its abusive influence. Think about the fact that there's lots of collateral damage. And before you judge institutions, religious or private, because a member of that institution did something wrong, think about and put in perspective that it wasn't the institution or the family member. It was that predator who chose to use that to have power and control over others and ruin their lives. And so they will pay a heavy price. And I just hope all of us can kind of make sense of all of that.
Yeah.
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes, it's been a pleasure once again to hear the insight that you have on these types of things, and we really appreciate you being here with us. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For anyone watching that wants to hear more about what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy, or more cases like this, and with awesome guests like Mike from Profiling Evil, then please like and subscribe. And we'll also leave Profiling Evil's tags and links below as well for you to go check out Mike, because I know that he has done such more extensive work and a lot of great videos about the Daybell case. So go check him out over there. And we thank you all for watching. Talk to y'all soon.
Thank you all so much. We'll talk to you soon.